So when it comes to Dune Part 1, Dune 2021, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, whatever you want to call it, it was easily my second favourite film of 2021. West Side Story being my favourite just because, Spielberg just knocked it out of the park. And I adore Dune Part 1. If you guys have seen my videos on Dune Part 1, you'll know that I love the film. I think it's amazing. I think what Denis Villeneuve did with that film was a staggering achievement. In many ways, it seemed like he was capturing Peter Jackson's energy from the Lord of the Rings trilogy and bringing that towards Dune, which was incredible. But as much as I love Dune 2021, Dune Part 1, Denis Villeneuve's Dune, whatever, I won't deny that the film is not perfect. No film is perfect, but there are a couple of things in the film that do, grind my gears a bit, both as a Dune fan, but also as a film fan as well. For example, some of the nighttime shots are just a little bit too dark. The whole sequence where Paul and Jessica are running away from the sandworm, there are times where I have to squint a little bit, just being like, why is it so dark? Can we raise the exposure up just a little bit? I understand it's a personal taste thing for Denis Villeneuve. He very much goes for a verisimilitude with his sci-fi fantasy worlds. They're very much grounded in reality, and so the lighting in the sandworm escape scene, for example, that nighttime exterior, it makes sense because that's how it would look like in real life. But as a viewer watching this on the big screen, and even on the little screen at home, I am squinting a little bit, just being like, can we make this just a little bit clearer? Because even when you're streaming the film, or even when you're watching it in cinema, certain cinemas don't calibrate their screen so the brightnesses aren't as how the filmmakers intended it to be. And so you're kind of sitting there at home or in the cinema kind of squinting a little bit, just being like, we're losing a bit of information here. All the shadows are a bit crushed and you can't really see the inside of the sandworm's mouth. Another issue I have is the portrayal of the shields. And what I mean by that is the visual design and the way the shields look visually on screen are amazing. I love the sort of jittery blue effect and then it goes red once the blade is able to penetrate through the shield. I think visually it's fantastic. But what I mean when I say that the shields are inconsistent is when we get to a big action set piece, the way these scenes are choreographed is so fast paced that it sort of goes against the slow blade penetrates the shield rule that they established earlier.
The slow blade penetrates the shield.
Fear is the little death that brings obliteration.
Total obliteration. It's total. Another issue I have, and bear in mind this is kind of nitpicky, is I kind of wish the film delved a little bit deeper into the Dune lore. For example, I wish we got more references to things like the Butlerian Jihad. That in itself is a very interesting concept, the idea of there was a war between humans and machines, and after the humans beat the machines, they decided on never creating a machine in the likeness of a human ever again. And not only that, it becomes more interesting when you realize that humanity devolved and got rid of machines and started to rely on humans once again to be our sources of information, thus creating things like the mentats, which are human computers. And that in itself is really interesting and something that the casual moviegoer would not understand about the Dune universe having seen the 2021 film. And not only that, I really wish we actually delved a little bit more deeper into the mentats, specifically Thufir Hawat and Paiter DeVries. Paiter especially, since Paiter in the books is much more developed than he is in the film. In the film, he's kind of just there. David Dastmalchian does a good job as Paiter. It's just that the character is just the Baron's right-hand man, and that's kind of it. But in the book, the character is just more interesting. There's this dynamic he has with the Baron where they keep trying to psych each other out and betray one another. Not only that, he's also in love with the Lady Jessica, and so when Paul and Jessica are captured, he essentially confesses his love to the incapacitated version of Jessica. That's a scene we see in the 1984 film, and I kind of wish we got to see it in the new one, just because it adds a bit of depth and dimension to Paiter, because, I won't lie, Paiter in the 2021 film, whilst portrayed very well by David Dastmalchian, isn't really well developed. David does the role justice and overall is a menacing presence. It's just that the character in the book, and even in the 1984 film, is just a bit richer. Same thing goes for Thufir a little bit. There are a couple of deleted scenes with Thufir being captured by the Harkonnens. Harkonnen, I don't know. Ever since I've watched the 2021 film, and I've watched it now, I kind of flip-flop between saying Harkonnen and Harkonnen. When I'm talking specifically about Dune 2021, I will say Harkonnen, but when I talk about anything like the book, for example, I will say Harkonnen, and god damn it, Denis Villeneuve, he's full-on just confused the way I say Harkonnen. I'm doing it again. But that being said, I'm not too worried that we didn't get enough Thufir in Dune Part 1, seeing as how Thufir plays a bit more of a prominent role in the second half of the book, where he becomes the mentat to House Harkonnen. And so I'm not too worried there. I just wish that in Dune Part 1 we got a little bit more of the mentat idea itself, because it's very subtle. Aside from the eye rolling where they're doing the mental calculations, that's the most you get. You never explicitly get the words mentat established into the film and what a mentat actually is, nor do you get the idea that Thufir is training Paul to be a mentat as well. But moving on, another issue I have with Dune 2021 is the sandworm sequence where Paul and Jessica are in the desert, they run into the sandworm, and that's kind of it. There's not really a point to it, and in many ways, whenever I watch the film, I do feel the pacing of the film slows down just for a little bit, just because the sequence itself is fine, it's well shot, it's just not really that exciting. The sandworm just appears, then heads off towards the nearby thumper, and that's it. And if I may be so bold, you could even just potentially cut the scene, because aside from showing the dangers of Arrakis, which we've already seen in earlier scenes like the Spiced Harvester sequence, you don't really, need the sandworm sequence. In the David Lynch film, the sandworm actually attacks them, and so there is a sense of threat and danger. But in this one, aside from the fact that they just run away from it, that's it. Now, I believe the 2021 version is more book accurate, it's just that when you look at the scene as a whole, there just really isn't a lot at stake here. But getting onto my biggest problem of Dune 2021, easily the biggest problem of the film is Dr. Yue. Now, Chan Cheng is great as Dr. Yue, the way he plays the character is fantastic, and the way the character interacts with other characters like Paul, for example, is really well done. I love their dynamic. You can tell that there is an established history and relationship between the two of them, that Dr. Yue is very much the caring, father-like figure for Paul Atreides. I mean, it's really obvious in the scene just before the Gom Jabbar where they're talking in Mandarin to one another, already establishing that the two are close and that Yue has probably taught Paul Mandarin. It's very interesting and a very good bit of character work. It's just that overall, Yue feels a little bit flat in the film. But that being said, Yue's main purpose in the Dune story, and in this film, of betraying House Atreides, kind of just comes out of nowhere in the 2021 version, which is ironic because Yue's plan to betray House Atreides is so front and center in the first couple of chapters of the novel that it's kind of ironic. The film script does this thing where they cut out the subplot from the book where House Atreides knows that there is a traitor amongst them, and because they cut it out, they don't really supplement it with anything else. And so, by getting rid of it, you make Yue's overall betrayal of House Atreides come out of nowhere. And the thing is, I don't know if them getting rid of the traitor subplot is going to negatively impact Dune Part 2, just because, spoilers for the second half of the Dune novel, it gets more interesting when Gurney Halleck returns to the fray and joins Paul and Jessica back in the Fremen Siege, and then Gurney goes to kill Jessica because he thinks Jessica is the traitor. That in itself is really interesting, and by getting rid of the subplot in the beginning half of Dune, that makes me kind of curious about whether they're going to keep that subplot in the second Dune film. But in terms of fixing Yue's character in the film, I don't think it actually would be that hard, seeing as how online there are a bunch of pictures of deleted scenes that involve Chan Chen's Dr. Yue. There is the scene where he gives Paul a Catholic Bible, and there's another scene where he's talking to Lady Jessica where he cries about his wife Wanna, which in itself is giving him more character depth and also setting the idea that his wife has been kidnapped by the Harkonnens. God damn it. And I think if the film added back in those scenes, it would make Yue's character arc much more impactful. In fact, if they added in all of the deleted scenes, I'd be down for that. I would be so down for a Dune Extended Edition because, I just want more of this world. I think the way Denis Villeneuve brought this world to life is just so fantastic. And some of the deleted scenes that they've hinted at just are so cool. Like Duncan Idaho free falling onto Arrakis. Alternate introduction scenes of characters like Stilgar, Jessica training Paul. And also the famous banquet scene that every Dune fan wants to see. Don't get me wrong, I like the banquet scene in the book, but I don't mind that they cut the scene from the film. But if you go and talk to any Dune fan that is hardcore, they're just like, no, I've wanted the banquet scene, I wanted to see it for so long, and they didn't put it in the film, and they shot it which I think is funny. But anyway, I digress. I know Denis Villeneuve said that he is opposed to the idea of extended cuts and director's cuts because once he deletes a scene, in his mind, he's killed it, it's dead forever, he never thinks about it. And it's a thing where, as a fan, as a creative, as a filmmaker myself, I would love the idea if someone told me, hey, we need to make your film shorter, and you cut out all these scenes that you think are impactful to the story, I'm all down for extended editions. I mean, numerous extended editions have always ended up, in my opinion, being better than the actual theatrical versions of the film themselves. For example, Lord of the Rings, Kingdom of Heaven, Zack Snyder's Justice League. Like, yeah, I'm all for extended editions and director's cuts. But if we don't get one for Dune Part 1, I understand Villeneuve's reasonings, although as a fan, I myself just want more Dune content. And so if we could get a longer version of Dune Part 1, I'd be so down for that. I mean, I love the movie and I absolutely cannot wait for Dune Part 2. I think it's going to be incredible, especially since it's going to be more action-packed. Though there is that weird thing where Denis Villeneuve has said that in terms of Dune Part 2, there's going to be less dialogue and more action. And what I think he means by that is that it's not just going to be a bunch of re-establishing things that have already happened. We're not going to talk about the Bene Gesserit once again. We're not going to talk about House Harkonnen and how they hate House Atreides and all that. I think what he means by that is that we have established the world now, so now it's just time for the characters to interact and for things to just escalate and get bigger, ready for the big finale of, you know, the ending of the first Dune novel. But I digress. Those are the issues I have with Dune Part 1, and hopefully Denis Villeneuve will be able to improve on it in Dune Part 2. But either way, I absolutely love this movie. But my question to you guys is simply, what is your biggest problem with Dune Part 1? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.